Welcome back to the Deep Dive, the place where we take complex foundational source material and, well, we distill it into immediately useful knowledge.
And today we are really taking on a huge task. We're cracking open the philosophical heart of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita.
We're moving past all the introductory scene setting and plunging straight into the second chapter. This is traditionally called Sankhya Yoga and Karma Yoga.
And this is it. This is the true beginning of Lord Kinch's spiritual teaching to Arjuna. Everything before this has been, the lead up.
That's right. So our mission here is to give you, the listener, a really detailed verse-by-verse breakdown of these very first lessons Kanya delivers.
This is where the whole conversation shifts. It's dramatic. It goes from battle strategy and, family politics.
That's something so much deeper. The core philosophy of the immortal self
Yeah.
and this idea of disinterested action.
Right. And to really feel the power of these verses, we have to remember the context. We have to put ourselves right there in the chariot.
Okay, so set the scene for us.
Well, Arjuna has just ordered Kanal to place the chariot right in the middle of the field, and specifically between his revered grandfather Valema and his beloved teacher Droya.
And he looks out and he sees his kinsman. And that sight it completely shatters him.
It's a total collapse.
Yeah.
Emotionally, psychologically, he's overwhelmed with grief. He throws down his bow and just sits down, refusing to fight.
And this deep, paralyzing despondency,
Right.
that's the catalyst. That's what kicks off this entire philosophical discourse. So the narration, interestingly, doesn't begin with Kansa speaking. It starts with Sanjaya, who is recounting the whole event to the blind king Tathurda. Let's start with the translation of verse 2.1. Sanjaya said, Madhusudana, he who destroyed the demon named Madhu, addressed the following words to Arjuna, who was overwhelmed with compassion and drowned in distress, and whose eyes were clouded with tears of despondence.
This first verse is just loaded with cues, both emotional and the theological. Sanjaya tells us Arjuna is in a complete crisis.
He uses some strong words.
Very strong. Kapayavyam, which means overwhelmed with compassion, and vigantam, or just drowned in distress. His eyes were literally full of tears, ashuprakulakasam. It's a total breakdown, mental and physical.
It's just so astonishing for a warrior like Arjuna. I mean, this is a man known for his bravery, and now his limbs are giving way, his mouth is parched.
Total psychological inertia. And the source material frames this, which is interesting, not as some kind of noble pacifism, but actually as faint-heartedness that's just disguised as compassion.
That's a key distinction.
A huge one.
Yeah.
And we have to notice the specific name Sanjaya uses for Kanya,
What is it on?
Madhusudana. And that isn't just a friendly nickname. It means the killer of the demon Matu.
Okay, so there's a subtext there.
A huge subtext.
Yeah.
By using this name at this exact moment, Sanjaya is doing two critical things. First, he's confirming Kansa's inherent nature as the destroyer of villainy.
So he's basically telegraphing to the blind king, Dolitarota, that his son, the evil Duryodhana, and his whole group are now facing the inevitable destroyer of evil. He's hinting at the outcome of the war.
Precisely. It sets the stage perfectly. Kunta is about to speak not just as a charioteer, but as the supreme lord who executes justice. And that right there justifies the fight that's about to happen.
And the response from Kona is immediate, and it's severe. He doesn't start with philosophy. He starts with a reprimand.
That's right. And before he even says a word, Sanjaya refers to him as Surabhagavan, the blessed Lord.
The supreme being.
The supreme being, the one who possesses all 6 divine traits: wealth, virtue, glory, greatness, knowledge, and dispassion. This context gives so much weight to the words that follow, and that brings us to verse 2.2.
The blessed Lord said, Arjuna, how has this infatuation overtaken you at this odd hour? It is shunned by noble souls. Neither will it bring heaven nor fame to you.
The tone here is one of surprise and admonition. He asks how this faint-heartedness, this kashmalam, has overtaken him at such a critical moment. Vyam samokastiram.
The subtext being that this is totally out of character.
Completely. And importantly, it's temporary. Kosha is hinting that this is just a passing phase that will slip away.
And he immediately dismantles Arjuna's whole argument by showing that this refusal to fight is, well, it's detrimental from every possible angle. He hits 3 distinct motivations for human action.
Yes, he uses 3 key expressions to condemn this weakness, and each one appeals to a different type of person. First, he calls it anaryajum.
Shunned by noble people.
Right. Noble, thoughtful people, they avoid this kind of faint-heartedness because it just obstructs duty and leads to nothing good. So that's for the seeker of wisdom.
And the second?
Asvarjam. It does not lead to heaven. For the virtuous person, heaven is the highest worldly goal. And for a warrior, a kshatriya, fighting a righteous war is the supreme duty. Avoiding it blocks you from that highest reward.
So wisdom, virtue, and then he hits reputation.
Exactly. Akirtakarnam, defaming. This appeals to the ordinary person who's concerned with their reputation. A noble person performs deeds that bring fame. This act of running from battle will bring nothing but lasting infamy, disgrace.
Which, as he says later, is worse than death for a respected warrior.
It is. So in one fell swoop, Canon is saying this single act of despondency fails every test. It fails philosophy, it fails piety, and it fails worldly reputation. It brings no good, no heaven, no fame, only degradation.
Which sets up the very direct, very severe command in 2.3, translation 2.3. O Partha, son of Putha of his Kunti, yield not to unmanliness, it does not befit you. Cast off this petty faint-heartedness and wake up, O vanquisher, scorcher of foes.
The language here is intentionally sharp and intimate. He calls him Partha, son of Putha, or Kunti. It's a name he uses 38 times in the Gita, and it's a reminder to Arjuna of his mother's bravery, his whole lineage.
It's meant to shame him out of it.
Absolutely. The command, klebya masmagama, is incredibly blunt. It's do not yield to unmanliness or impotence. This weakness is unrighteous and totally unwarranted for a warrior of his class.
And he says, it does not befit you at all.
Exactly. Natapayupapadate. Arjuna is brave, but this cowardice is just masquerading as righteousness, as compassion.
And then he uses that title, Paransapa, scorcher of foes, to just drive the point home. He's demanding that Arjuna ignore his own philosophical excuses and just get ready to fight.
The duty of the moment, the dharma, that is what's paramount.
So Kadant has commanded him to fight based on duty. But Arjuna immediately pushes back, reframing his refusal. He argues it's not cowardice, it's a moral dilemma.
He's trying to shift the entire debate away from dharma, from duty, and toward the idea of sin.
Let's look at verse 2.4. Arjuna said, O slayer of Madhu, Mahustana, how shall I fight Bhama and Droa with arrows on the battlefield? Both of them are worthy of worship.
So Arjuna is trying to defend his inaction. He's saying, I'm not afraid of death. I'm afraid of committing a mortal sin by killing my revered elders.
A sin that he sees as worse than any worldly loss.
Far worse. He highlights how venerable they are. Bhuma, his grandfather, loved him since childhood. And Droa, his preceptor, gave him superior training. He taught him control of the Brahma weapon, a skill he didn't even teach his own son.
And Arjuna's use of Madhusudanana and Arisudana here, it feels very pointed. It's like a subtle rhetorical jab back at Akun.
It is. He's implying, you are the killer of villains. Why are you telling me to kill my own affectionate, worship-worthy well-wishers? How can that possibly be righteous?
His conclusion is just dire. He says even living on alms, which is forbidden for a warrior, would be better than enjoying blood-stained pleasures after killing his teachers.
He truly believes the sin of killing them outweighs the sin of shirking his duty. It's a total moral paralysis.
And that paralysis leads directly to this state of utter indecision we see in verse 2.6. Translation 2.6. We don't know which is preferable for us, to fight or not to fight, nor do we know whether we shall win or whether they will conquer us. The sons of Dithanura, by killing whom we don't even wish to live, are arrayed against us.
That phrase, na kaitad vidma kataranoganya, it just expresses complete and utter confusion. He's trapped. Ketu's command says fight, but his own conscience says killing his elders is a terrible sin.
But notice how the question of winning or losing almost becomes secondary. He seems to fear success more than failure here.
Oh, he absolutely fears success more. Think about it. If they lose, they die. They might even attain heaven, but if they win.
The whole reason for fighting to secure the kingdom and its joys for their kinsmen, it all just vanishes.
Exactly. The very people they live for, even the Para sons, would be dead. Victory would be completely meaningless. It would just lead to an even more unbearable grief.
And this brings us to what might be the most critical turning point in the entire Gita. Arjuna abandons his role as a commander and becomes a supplicant. A huge shift. This is verse 2.7.
A monumental shift.
Translation 2.7. My nature is weighed down with the vice of faint-heartedness, and my mind is confused with regard to duty. I entreat you, tell me what is decidedly good for me. I am your disciple. Do instruct me who have taken refuge in you.
This is a huge verse. Arjuna finally admits his personal failing. Karpanyado pahatas vavava. His nature is weighed down by this vice of faint-heartedness. He realizes his own emotional agitation, his intellectual confusion about dharma. It all means his current path is just untenable.
And he transforms the whole dynamic. He goes from master of the chariot to disciple of the charioteer. He declares Yestaha, I am your disciple.
And Thoprapanam, I have taken refuge in you. And this declaration has 4 critical implications that basically force Ketan to act.
Okay, what are they?
First, by admitting he's confused, he acknowledges that the teacher can choose whether or not to answer. Second, by asking, tell me what is decidedly good for me, the Sharyas, he puts the responsibility on Ketan to provide the definitive answer for salvation.
So the burden shifts.
Completely. Third, by becoming a disciple, a Shia, the responsibility for his guidance now rests entirely with the teacher. And fourth,
The surrender. Tvaya prapanam. But the sources note he hasn't fully surrendered yet, has he?
no, and that's the complexity. He says he has taken refuge, but then he says, instruct me, which implies he still holds on to a tiny fragment of responsibility. And, as we'll see, he still refuses to fight.
It just shows how profound his suffering is. It's so deep that even his commitment to the Supreme is. It's partial.
And he addresses that depth of suffering in the next verse, 2.8.
Translation 2.8. Even on obtaining undisputed sovereignty and an affluent kingdom on this earth and lordship over the gods, I don't see any remedy that can remove the grief which is drying up my senses.
This confirms it. His grief is not material. If it were just about losing a kingdom, well, getting it an even bigger kingdom or even, lordship over the gods, that would cure it.
But it's not about that. It's about the potential massacre of his family.
Right. He recognizes that no amount of worldly pleasure or celestial power can remove the grief that is chokamochomsham indriyam, literally parching his senses. His suffering is existential. It can only be cured by spiritual knowledge.
And after this profound statement of inner desolation comes the final definitive refusal in 2.9, right before the gospel begins. Translation 2.9. Sanjaya said, after addressing the Lord of the senses thus, Arjuna, the conqueror of sleep, said to him, I'll not fight, and became silent.
Arjuna, the conqueror of sleep, Gukesha, who should be awake and alert, now declares flatly, I'll not fight. It's a final refusal.
And K, who's addressed here as Hiteksha, the Lord who knows the feelings of all beings. He understands.
He understands that Arjuna's delusion is from this deep-seated infatuation for his kinsman. And the moment Arjuna falls silent, Kanja knows he's ready. He's ready to receive the teaching.
The source material notes that Kate is motivated by love for his devotee. He judges Arjuna not by his confused words, but by his genuine feelings.
And structurally, the language ita vaka uvaka is important. The word vaka, or word, seems redundant, but it's not. It's deliberate. It points to the secret wisdom Kado is about to speak.
The magnificent philosophical foundations of what we call Sankhya Yoga, the discipline of knowledge. Okay, so let's unpack this. Kanan's response to Arjuna's silence is not gentle comfort. It's a sharp, immediate injection of absolute truth.
Right. He starts the instruction by rebuking the misplaced grief. Verse 2.1.
The Blessed Lord said, Arjuna, you grieve for those who should not be grieved for, yet speak words of wisdom. The wise grieve neither for the living nor for the dead.
This is the critical juncture. Kanta points out the fundamental contradiction in Arjuna's position. You're grieving for those who shouldn't be grieved for. And yet, Prajavadai, you speak words of wisdom, railing against the evils of family destruction.
So he's saying you get it intellectually, you understand the soul is imperishable and the body is perishable, but your emotions are completely contradicting that knowledge.
Exactly. Kajan is defining grief as being rooted solely in ignorance. The ignorance of identifying the permanent self, the real, with the transient body and its circumstances, the unreal.
The root of all anxiety, fear, sorrow. It's the feeling of mine and the attachment to the perishable world.
And the wise man, the Panchita, he knows the difference. He knows the real from the unreal, and because of that, he doesn't grieve.
This philosophical distinction leads directly to the core definition of the eternal self in 2-point wall, establishing its existence beyond the framework of time. Translation 2.11. In fact, there was never a time when I or you or these kings were non-existent, nor is it a fact that we shall cease to be in future.
This is the cornerstone of the whole philosophy. The immortality and eternity of the self, the Atma. The self is a transcendental entity. It exists outside of time.
He says, Jatunasai, you, and these kings were never non-existent in the past.
And Nakayiva na Paviyama. Nor shall we cease to exist in the future. He explicitly names Ahan, Twayo, and Imejanatipa, these kings. He's identifying himself with the soul of common men to show this is a universal truth.
So the real entity exists continually beyond all circumstances.
It's never non-existent in the least. The implication is profound. The body is perishable, but the self is not. It's a basic principle. What exists at the beginning and the end must also exist in the middle. The body only appears in the middle. The self is the permanent, changeless onlooker.
And this internal changelessness is then illustrated so beautifully in 2.33, using the analogy of change within a single lifetime. It makes transmigration conceptually much easier to grasp.
He does.
Translation 2.13. Just as boyhood, youth, and old age are attributed to the soul through this body, even so it attains another body. The wise man, enlightened one, does not get deluded about this.
Dehinos minyata dehe kamaya yavanaja. The soul, the dehin, is distinct from the changing body, the deha.
Right. We experience our body changing constantly, from babyhood to youth to old age, but the I that's experiencing all this feels like the same I.
And that proves the soul is changeless and separate. So attaining a new body after death, tatha daihantra praptya, is just another stage of change for the physical, subtle, and causal bodies.
And the wise man, the Dheres, isn't deluded by this because he understands that continuity, that permanence.
Right. We don't grieve when our body moves from youth to old age, so we shouldn't grieve when it moves to a new body. And the sources note that while the physical body is left behind at death, the subtle and causal bodies travel with the soul, ensuring that continuity of experience across lifetimes until final salvation.
So if the soul is permanent but the body is transitory, Kanfa then has to address the nature of our worldly interactions, and he does that in 2.12.
Yes.
Translation 2.12. O son of Kunti, the senses objects which give rise to the feelings of heat and cold, pleasure and pain, etc., are transitory and fleeting. Therefore, Arjuna, bear them patiently, namely remain unaffected by them or ignore them.
This introduces matra sparjo. That's the contact between the senses, and that includes the inner mind and the external objects. The little particle 2 is important here. It emphasizes that these transitory contacts are completely distinct from the permanent soul.
And these contacts produce Shuta-sukha-dukkha, the inevitable dualities of life. Pleasure and pain, honor and dishonor, heat and cold.
And the critical detail is that they are agamapena, appearing and disappearing, and anichir, transient, changing every single moment.
So the lesson is one of spiritual resilience.
It is. Since these objects and circumstances are transient, tasdidikasva, they should be borne patiently, ignored, endured without reaction. The problem isn't the existence of pain or pleasure. It's the affinity or the attachment we have for them. If you can eliminate that attachment, the circumstance loses its power to inflict sorrow.
He then moves from the perishable body back to the indestructible self again in 2.14, reinforcing the nature of the real. Translation 2.1. Know that to be imperishable by which all this world is pervaded, for none can bring about the destruction of the indestructible.
Know that imperishable entity by which all this world is pervaded. The imperishable spirit, the self, pervades the entire appearing world.
So the world only appears to exist because of the underlying light of this real entity?
That's the idea. And the second part provides absolute certainty. Vinashamavyasya nakashit kartum arhati. None can destroy the indestructible. The soul is absolutely immune to destruction. And conversely, the perishable body cannot be saved from destruction no matter what Arjuna does.
That distinction is the philosophical foundation for the command to fight that comes in 2.18.
It is.
Translation 2.18. These bodies of the imperishable, indefinable, and eternal soul are spoken of as perishable. Therefore, O Arjuna, fight.
Kalinga now gives the definitive description of the soul using 3 really powerful adjectives. It is anajina, indestructible, never changes or decays.
Aprameyasya, indefinable.
Right, beyond the senses, speech, and mind. Because the soul is the very thing that illuminates those instruments. And nityasya, eternal, existing all the time.
And in stark contrast, antavanta imedaho extoret. The physical, subtle, and causal bodies are perishable. Antavanta.
A mere mass of decay. The distinction is absolute. Grief and all the evils that come with it, attachment, mindness, they are born only when the immortal soul identifies itself with the body.
So once that distinction is understood,
The real cannot perish and the unreal can't truly exist. Therefore fight, because the self cannot be slain.
which directly addresses Arjuna's big concern about being the slayer. Kina corrects that ignorance in 2.19.
Hmm.
Translation 2.18. Both of them are ignorant, he who holds the soul as slayer and he who considers it as slain, for the soul neither slays nor is slain.
Yeah, in elveti hantaraya shena manyata hatam. Ignorance is the root of both assumptions. The soul has no intrinsic doership. It only assumes the role of the slayer by identifying with the physical body, the tool of action.
And the idea of the soul being slain is equally ignorant, because only what is changeable and perishable can be destroyed.
And the soul is immutable. Uhautana vijayana both are ignorant. It's a critical philosophical point. The soul is eternally free from both action and modification.
Verse 2.20 goes even deeper, defining the soul by its freedom from the 6 inevitable modifications of the physical universe.
Yes, this is a beautiful breakdown.
Translation 2.2. The soul is neither born nor does it die, nor does it become on coming into being. It is unborn, eternal, constant, and primeval. It is not killed even when the body is slain.
So, the body is subject to 6 stages: birth, existence, change, growth, decay, and finally, perish. Gita defines the soul by its absolute immunity to all of these. It is na jayat muryat, neither born nor does it die.
It's aja, unborn, nitya, eternal, never decaying, shashva, constant and changeless, and purata, ancient and primeval.
These terms just hammer home the point that the body undergoes modification because it's perishable, while the soul is absolutely free from any change. It neither grows nor decays. It is without a beginning or an end.
And this detailed description really only serves one purpose: to remove Arjuna's grief. If the soul can't be killed, there's no one to lament for.
Precisely.
And to bring this abstract concept of transmigration home, to really diminish the fear of death, Kinney uses that wonderful analogy of changing clothes in 2.22.
Yeah, the classic analogy.
Translation 2.22. As a man discarding worn-out clothes puts on new ones, so the embodied soul, casting off worn-out bodies, enters into others which are new.
This is the perfect illustration. Just as a man casts off Vasi's Jarani, worn-out clothes, for Navani, new ones, the embodied soul, the Dehi, casts off old bodies and acquires new ones.
The analogy is so powerful because nobody grieves when they change their old clothes. So why grieve over the death of a body when the soul remains unattached and unchanged?
And here's the subtle detail. The soul doesn't literally migrate. It only seems to migrate because of its identification with the body. When you go from being a baby to a youth, you're the same person, but you graft the body's changes onto your own sense of self.
So transmigration is just the identification of the soul with a change of body.
Which the soul acquires based on its past actions, yes.
Kana now provides what you could call physical proof that the soul is beyond the reach of the gross elements of the physical world. This is in 2.23.
A very compelling argument.
Translation 2.23. Weapons can't cut the soul, nor can fire burn it. Water can't drench it, nor can wind make it dry.
This confirms the soul's immunity to the 4 gross elements. Naina Chindanti, Shistri's weapons made of earth, cannot cut it. Naina Dahari Tavaka fire cannot burn it. Naina the Kilayansi water cannot drench it. And Naishigati Maruta wind cannot dry it.
The philosophical implication there is that the soul is beyond even matter, beyond prati.
Right. Since the 4 gross elements are just products of the 5th element, ether or kasha, and the soul is the source and illuminator of all of them, the elements can't possibly impair the soul. It's only our ignorance that makes us lament for something that stays the same while the body decays.
Building on that absolute immunity, Kesa then gives this decisive description of the self in 2.24 using 8 descriptive adjectives for maximum impact. Translation 2.24. This soul is uncleavable, incombustible, and neither can be wetted nor dried. It is eternal, all-pervading, stable, constant, and everlasting.
So we have 4 negative adjectives confirming its imperviousness to any external action. Achidyayam, uncleavable; adeyayam, incombustible; akladya, impervious to water; and ashidya, cannot be dried. It's beyond the reach of every weapon or force in the physical universe.
And then 4 affirmative adjectives that define its intrinsic, stable, unmoving nature.
Yes. Nitya, eternal, always the same. Sarvagata, all-pervading. Akal, immovable, it has no movement in itself. And Sanatana, everlasting and beginningless.
And that contrast is the crucial takeaway for you, the listener. The material world is transitory, it's kaleidoscopic, changing every instant.
But the soul is eternal and stable. Grief only arises from identifying that uniform and constant self with the changing temporary body.
This realization leads to the description of the soul's more subtle nature in 2.25,
Hmm.
translation 2.25. The soul is unmanifest, unthinkable, and immutable. Therefore, knowing it as such, you should not grieve.
The soul is defined as avyaktoyam, or unmanifest, because it cannot be perceived by the senses. It's asintuyam, unthinkable, because it's beyond the capacity of the mind and intellect to grasp.
Right, any label or thought we apply to it is a product of the mind, and the self is the observer that comes before the mind.
Exactly. And avikaryamushate, immutable, meaning it undergoes absolutely no change, unlike matter or prithvi, which is the source of all creation, and is inherently subject to change.
So, Kanshya concludes this sequence with the logical outcome, realizing the soul as uncleavable, unmanifest, immutable, and eternal.
Leads inexorably to the conclusion. Nevehoshitum arhasi. You should not grieve.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Kant introduces a counterargument in 2.26. He temporarily adopts the mindset of the ignorant person who identifies the soul with the body, just to prove that even that common incorrect view doesn't justify grief.
It's a brilliant rhetorical move.
Translation 2.26. O mighty armed, even if you regard this soul as constantly undergoing birth and death, even then you should not grieve.
Right, so Kant basically says, okay, let's just for a moment accept the view of the materialists. Those who believe the soul is nitya jada nitya maitam, constantly being born and constantly dying, just like the body changes.
So he says, even if you ignore my spiritual teaching and accept this flawed premise, you still shouldn't grieve.
Why? Because the cycle, even when viewed materialistically, is inevitable, and that's stated clearly in 2.27.
Translation 2.27. Death is certain of him who is born, and rebirth is certain of him who is dead. You should not, therefore, grieve over the inevitable.
Jatasya, hidrovomochu truvajanamotasya. Death is certain for the born, birth is certain for the dead. This cycle is eternal. It's been going on since time immemorial.
The law of nature.
It's the law of nature. The abandonment of one form is death, and the change to the next form is birth. So since this whole cycle is inevitable, apararya, there's no rational ground for grief, even for those who wrongly identify the soul with the changing body.
And Katens closes this part of the discussion on the transient nature of beings in 2.28, emphasizing the almost dreamlike ephemeral reality of embodied existence itself. Translation 2.28, O Bharata, Arjuna, all beings were unmanifest before they were born, and will become unmanifest again when they are dead. They are manifest only in the intermediate stage. What is the point, then, for lamentation?
Yaptadini Bhutani. All beings originate from the unmanifest before birth. Bethamadhyani, they are manifest only in this intermediate stage, during life, and Avyaktani Tananyeva, they become unmanifest again after death.
So since these bodies have no real existence in their origin or their end, they're just temporary phenomena, like a dream that vanishes when you wake up.
Exactly. Tatraka Petadavana. What is the point of lamentation?
And this contrast between the worldly and the spiritual perspective leads Kit to this profound statement about how hard it is to actually realize this self, even after you hear the teaching. That's in 2.29.
A very humbling verse.
Translation 2.29. One perceives the soul as marvelous, another speaks of it as marvelous, another hears of it as marvelous, while none knows it only by hearing of it.
The realization of the self is not intellectual. It's self-evident. It's intuited by the person himself. Jadyavat Pachati one perceives it as marvelous because this realization is beyond conventional knowledge or proof or sense perception.
And Shkardyava Dadati speaks of it as marvelous. Only a few liberated souls can really convey this truth to an aspirant. Even hearing about it is not the same as true knowledge.
Right. Shrutvapyan the Veda Nakaiva Kaichit, none knows it. Even after hearing. Mere hearing isn't enough. You have to become established in your own self to truly know it. The self is transcendent, and realization requires a transcendence of the senses and the intellect.
And Kaitsa concludes this entire foundational section of Sankhya Yoga in 2.30, reiterating the final decisive philosophical takeaway.
The summary statement.
Translation 2.3. O Bharata, this soul residing in the bodies of all can never be slain, therefore you should not grieve for any being.
Dehinityam avatoya dehesarva shavarata, the soul residing in all bodies, is eternally imperishable. This whole comprehensive section from 2.11 to 2.3 establishes the absolute distinction between the imperishable soul, the real, and the perishable body, the unreal.
And that realization is essential because if you truly internalize this truth, grief becomes impossible. The perishable body's nature is to perish. The self's nature is to be eternal. So Kagan has laid out the philosophical truth. The soul can't be killed, therefore grief is illogical. But Arjuna is a warrior. He's not a contemplative sage in a cave.
Right. So how does Kaya translate this abstract permanence into the concrete, immediate reality of the battlefield?
Well, he shifts focus completely. He moves to practical duty, to dharma. Verse 2.31.
Translation 2.31. Looking at your own duty as well, you should not waver, for there is nothing more welcome to a man of the warrior class than a righteous war.
And there's a seamless transition to the practical discipline of action, to karma yoga. Kana now highlights Arjuna's svadharmam, his own prescribed duty. For a kshatriya, a warrior waging war to uphold righteousness, is the absolute foremost duty.
Dharmyadiyutak triyonyat katriyashana vidyate. Nothing is more welcome to a warrior than a righteous war. He's appealing to the practical social order. This is your job, and it's the best job for you right now.
And performing this duty brings the ultimate worldly reward, as described in 2.32, which is a powerful incentive for the socially minded.
Translation 2.32. Happy lucky are the Kshatriyas, O Partha, who get such an unsolicited opportunity for war, which is an open gateway to heaven. Yadiche kopapana svargadvaram apadabam. This opportunity for a righteous war has come unsolicited, and it's described as an open door to heaven, a svargadvaram. The happiness that comes from fulfilling your duty is considered superior to any temporary worldly pleasure.
And now Kita pivots back to the consequences of inaction, returning to that theme of infamy, which he argues is worse than death in 2.34.
A very potent argument for a warrior.
Translation 2.34. All creatures will ever recount your undying infamy, and infamy is surely worse than death for a man enjoying popular esteem.
If Arjuna shirks his duty, all beings, not just men, but even gods and demons, will recount his everlasting infamy, avyam. He'll be called a coward, which destroys the very essence of his identity.
Sambhavatasya kakritir marant patir syat. For a man held in high esteem, dishonor and infamy are more painful than natural death.
That's right. Death is inevitable, and in death you keep your fame. But shirking your duty is a sin that results in everlasting disgrace and a loss of esteem, which Keita knows is the greatest possible torment for a warrior.
And this disgrace shows up immediately as contempt from his peers, which he outlines in 2.35.
Yes.
Translation 2.35. The great chariot warriors who held you in high esteem will hold you lightly, thinking that you have desisted from the war out of fear.
The great warriors Buna, Drocha, Kappa, who right now respect his mighty valor, they will slight him. They'll believe he fled the battle out of fear by Adranad Uparate.
And that loss of respect is just a devastating blow to a warrior's ego and status.
And the final consequence, detailed in 2.36, is just continuous emotional torment.
Translation 2.36. Your enemies, disparaging your strength, will speak many unbecoming words. What can be more distressing than this?
His enemies, Tabachade, will slander his strength, Indantaspo, and speak these unbecoming words, Avachavasye kabahun varisyanti. Hampi is pointing out that this continuous agonizing slander is the distressing result of shirking his duty.
So we've had Sankhya Yoga, why grief is illogical, and the immediate Kshatriya duty, why fighting is essential. Now Kita gives us the crucial synthesis, the bridge that unites knowledge and action. This is the transition to true Karma Yoga in 2.39.
A very important transition.
Translation 2.39. O Partha, Arjuna, this attitude of mind has been presented to you from the point of view of Jnana Yoga, discipline of knowledge. Now hear the same as presented from the point of view of Karma Yoga, the discipline of selfless action. Equipped with this state of mind, you will be able to shake off completely the shackles of karma action.
This attitude, this determination towards equanimity and non-grief, has been described philosophically through Sukha Yoga, the path of knowledge, distinguishing the real from the unreal.
And then Yoga TV Imaishu, now here the same attitude, the same buddhi or intellect, but in the context of Karma Yoga, the discipline of action.
Kershi is saying the goal is the same equanimity, but the method is practical. It utilizes action itself as the means to get there.
And the promise here is immense. Buddhyukaro yaya patakarma vanha prasyasi. By attaining this state of mind, this equanimity, Arjuna will be liberated from the bondage of actions.
Right. Arjuna was afraid of the sin of war. But Kirkia is saying sin only comes from attachment and aversion, not from the action itself if it's performed with equanimity.
And this path of disinterested action is safe. unlike worldly endeavors where effort can be lost or results can be adverse, Kriya provides that assurance in 2.4.
Mhm.
Translation 2.40. In this path of disinterested action, there is no loss of effort, nor is there any adverse result. Even a little practice of this discipline protects one from great fear of birth and death.
This is the glory of karma yoga. First, nabikamana, there is no loss of effort. If you start pursuing equanimity, that knowledge, that state of even-mindedness is permanent. It never gets extinct.
Mhm.
The effort toward the real is itself real.
Second, napatyavaya vidyat, there is no adverse result.
Right. If you perform a ritual sacrifice with a desire for a fruit and you make a mistake, that error can have a negative result. But actions performed without desire for fruits yield no adverse result.
And third, svalpam api asidharmasya trayate mahatobayat. Even a little practice of this disinterested action protects one from the great fear.
The great fear being the cycle of birth and death, says Sara. The equanimity you attain by renouncing the fruits of your actions is permanent and it's universally protective.
So before fully diving into the mechanics of detached action, Katana gives a warning. He says the path of ritualistic, motivated action is a massive distraction that destroys the very possibility of a steady mind.
A crucial warning, verses 2.42-43.
Translation 2.4243. Arjuna, those who are obsessed by desires, who look upon heaven as the supreme goal and argue that there is nothing beyond heaven and pleasures and who are devoted to the letter of the Vedas, are unwise. They utter flowery speech recommending many acts of various kinds for the attainment of pleasure and prosperity with rebirth as their fruit.
Kuto is describing the Kamatmana Svargapadar. These are the people obsessed by desires for whom heavenly pleasures are the supreme goal. They cling to the ritualistic parts of the Veda, interpreting the scripture literally to maximize their own enjoyment.
And their speech is pupita vakam, flowery speech. It's attractive, like beautiful flowers, but it's ultimately transient. It promises pleasure and prosperity, but it yields no permanent fruit.
It just prolongs the wheel of birth, Janma Karma Phala Pradam. They are avipushita, unwise, because they can't discriminate between the real and the unreal. They believe desire is the only motivator for action.
And this intense focus on all these different outcomes, it just destroys the capacity for a single pointed focus, which leads us to 2.44, translation 2.44. Those whose minds are carried away by such flowery speech and who are attracted towards pleasures and prosperity can't attain the determinate intellect concentrated on God.
Bhoga Aishwarya Prasaktanam. Clinging to pleasures and prosperity makes the mind impure, and their intellect cannot achieve vyavasayatmika buddhi, that determinate, single-pointed focus you need for God realization.
The analogy I always think of is the modern computer user. If you open 100 tabs in your browser, each one representing a different desire for wealth, for fame, for a vacation, your computer crashes.
That's a perfect analogy. Their intellects are bahushoka hi anantash, endlessly branched and diverse. A single desire, say for a son, branches out into dozens of required actions. Medicine, oblation, incantation, worship. A mind scattered by countless desires cannot possibly make the firm decision needed for God realization.
Whereas the determinate intellect is single because its goal is singular, God.
Exactly.
So Katanas now provides the explicit command to transcend this duality and scattering in 2.45. Translation 2.45. O Arjuna, the Vedas deal with the three Gudas, attributes, and their evolutes. Be free from those attributes, rise above the pairs of opposites, remain balanced, be unconcerned about the supply of wants and preservation of what has been already attained, and get established in the self.
Praguyavya Veda. The ritualistic parts of the Vedas deal with the three Gukasattva, Rajas, and Tamas, and their evolutes, which make up all worldly and heavenly enjoyments. And Gusa's command is direct. Nistraguyabhav Arjuna, be free from these attributes and their worldly manifestations.
And he also has to be nirvanva, free from the pairs of opposites, the dvanva, like attachment, raga, and aversion, dhya.
And those dualities are the real stumbling blocks to spiritual progress. They lead to bondage. Then comes the instruction on practical living. Be niryoga kama atmavan.
So you have to be unconcerned with yoga, providing for your wants, and ama, preserving what you already have.
Canis is telling Arjuna to delegate even the worry about tomorrow's basic supplies if he dedicates himself to the self, Atmavan. This establishes a deep reliance on divine providence, which is absolutely key to equanimity.
And now we arrive at the practical instruction for action, the core tenet of Karma Yoga, starting with what might be the most quoted verse in the entire text, 2.47.
The big one.
Translation 2.47. Your right is to perform your duty only, but never lay claim to its fruit. Let not the fruit of action be your object, nor let your attachment be to inaction.
Karmani avadhikaraste. Your right is to perform your duty only. The singular use of karmani emphasizes that Arjuna's specific duty right now is to wage war, but the principle is universal. Your right is limited strictly to the performance of the action itself, not the result.
Mafaleo kadikana, never lay claim to its fruit. The fruit is dispensed by the Lord, not by you. And desire for the fruit is what makes a person feel like the agent of the action, which is what leads to bondage.
And then you have two negative injunctions that guard against extremism. First, makarma phalahetarvur, do not make the fruit the object of your action. And second, mate sagospet akarmaich, do not attach yourself to inaction, which is just tamasika idleness and also leads to bondage.
This principle leads directly to the defining feature of yoga in 2.48, translation 2.48. O Dhananjaya, the conqueror of wealth, perform actions, duties, being fixed in yoga, renouncing attachment, having become even-minded in success and failure, equanimity, equilibrium, is called yoga.
Kay now calls him Dhananjaya, conqueror of wealth, acknowledging his capacity for victory. And the command is, yogas tal kuru karmaich, perform actions while being fixed in yoga. This steadfastness just means keeping the mind poised throughout.
And the formula for that poised state is salgatakta, renouncing attachment to the action itself, and siddhyasitu samobhutva, being even-minded in success and failure.
And then, the powerful definition. Samatva yoga usya in equanimity is called yoga. This even-mindedness in profit or loss, praise or blame, is the essence. The person who maintains this poised state from beginning to end is steadfast in yoga.
And that equanimity is said to be the embodiment of the Lord himself.
It is.
By defining yoga this way, Kina makes it crystal clear in 2.49 that motivated, result-driven action is fundamentally inferior to detached action.
Absolutely.
Translation 2.49. O Dhananjaya, action with a selfish motive is far inferior to that performed with equanimity of mind. Seek refuge in this evenness of mind, for wretched are those who crave for fruit of action.
Duridhi avarya karma buddhi yoga. Motivated action, karma, is far inferior to action performed with equanimity, buddhi yoga. Motivated action binds you to the wheel of rebirth. Equanimous action leads to God realization.
And the people who crave the fruit of action are called kupafo phalahitava, wretched or miserable. Why is that word wretched used so strongly?
Because the eternal self should never be subservient to the perishable fruit of action. To dedicate your immoral spirit and your life's energy to chasing some temporary success is considered utterly ignoble, miserable. You're treating the real as secondary to the unreal.
So he commands Buddha Sharancham Anvicha, seek refuge only in this evenness of mind.
Yes.
And this brings us to that profound definition of proficiency in 2.50.
One of my favorites.
Translation 2.50 point. Endowed with equanimity, one frees oneself in this life from good, virtue, and evil vice alike. Therefore, devote yourself to this yoga of equanimity. Skill in actions lies in the practice of this yoga.
Buddhiyukto jahatiha ube sukata dukte. A person with equanimity detaches himself from both virtue, sukata, and vice. He becomes untouched by them, like a lotus leaf is untouched by water, because he has realized he is the sentient self, distinct from the body's actions.
And the final, famous line, Yoga kurmasu kaushalam. Skill in actions lies in the practice of this yoga. But wait, isn't that counterintuitive? If I perform my duties skillfully, shouldn't that mean technical proficiency? Why is Kin ignoring that common definition?
Because he is replacing the worldly definition of skill with the spiritual one. Think about it. If skill in actions meant technical expertise, then a highly skilled criminal would also be a yogi, which is absurd.
Ah, right.
True skill, kashalam, is defined here as equanimity in success and failure. Technical skill still binds you if you're attached to the outcome. Spiritual skill is freedom from the bondage created by the action. That freedom is the highest skill.
And this true skill leads to the supreme state, as described in 2.51, translation 2.51. Wise men endowed with equanimity, renouncing the fruits of actions, freed from the shackles of births, attain the blissful supreme state.
Wise aspirants, Manite, renounce both manifest and latent desires for the fruit. And this leads to Yamabandha Vinirmukta. They are freed from the cycle of birth and death.
They attain Padal Gachanti Anamayam, a spotless, blissful, supreme state, free from blemish.
And the sources note that this state is automatic. It's spontaneous. You don't need a separate effort to create the state. You only need to eliminate the affinity to matter. which is what obstructs the already existing state.
Finally, Catan returns to the state of the intellect in 2.53, referencing Arjuna's earlier confusion about all the different scriptural authorities.
Right, he brings it full circle.
Translation 2.53. When your intellect, confused by hearing conflicting doctrines, has become immovable and firm, steady in meditation on God, you will then attain self-realization or union with God.
Arjuna's intellect was confused, Pratipana, by hearing all these conflicting scriptural doctrines, Shruti Pratipana, that promised all these different results.
And the realization, tada yogam avapsyasi, only happens when the intellect achieves samadha akala immovable and firm concentration.
The mind has to renounce its affinity for the world and fix its resolve entirely on God. And this union with God is the ultimate objective. It's what transforms the confused warrior into a steady yogi.
Okay, so having heard that a steady intellect leads to union with God, Arjuna immediately wants, well, a philosophical job description. He wants to know what this realized soul looks like in real life.
Yes, he asks the famous questions in 2.54.
Translation 2.54. Arjuna said, O Keshava, what is the mark of the man of steadfast wisdom established in God? How does the man of firm wisdom speak? How does he sit? And how does he walk?
So Arjuna asks 4 distinct practical questions about the Sthitaprajna, the man of steadfast wisdom. He wants to know the caveat, the marker description. Kimprabheta, how he speaks, Kimasita, how he sits or is dispassionate, and Kimbraheta, how he walks or behaves.
And Kasi answers in order, starting with the primary mark in 2.55. Translation 2.55. The Blessed Lord said, O Partha, Arjuna, when a man abandons all the desires visiting the mind and is satisfied in the self, he's said to be stable in wisdom.
The defining characteristic is the total renunciation of desires. Prajahati yada kaman sarvan manogatan, when a man completely abandons all desires visiting the mind, and the emphasis is on all desires, leaving no trace behind.
And what replaces that void?
Atmani evatmana toy. Satisfied in the self by the self. This isn't an achieved contentment. It's the inherent, eternal, spontaneous contentment of the self. When desires are completely cast off, Sthita prajas tada ukyat, then he is stable in wisdom. Stability is inherent once the distraction of desire is removed.
And this internal stability is reflected in his disposition during both hardship and pleasure, which addresses the question of how he speaks or thinks, his mental state. That's in 2.56.
Right.
Translation 2.56. He whose mind remains unperturbed amidst sorrows, who does not crave for pleasures, and who is free from attachment, fear, and anger, is called a meditative sage, Muni, of stable wisdom.
He is dukhas anudvinyamano, unperturbed amidst sorrows and failures, and sukhyo vigataspan, does not crave for pleasures or successes. This person remains perfectly calm, a true sage, a muni.
And crucially, he is Vita Raga Bhaya Krodha, free from attachment, fear, and anger.
And that's the chain. Attachment raga to worldly things is the source. If you're attached to a possession and it's threatened by someone stronger, fear arises. If it's threatened by someone weaker, anger arises. Freedom from attachment naturally leads to fearlessness and calmness.
Verse 2.57 provides even more detail on his unattached conduct. Translation 2.57. He who remains unattached everywhere and who neither rejoices at receiving favorable things nor is dejected at receiving unfavorable things, his wisdom is stable.
Yas sarvatrana bisnya, unattached everywhere. He doesn't rejoice supan prapyana binandati, nor is he dejected ashupan prapyana udvizati. He understands that these shifting circumstances of good and evil belong to matter, not to the self, and therefore he remains unconnected to them.
And Kanan now addresses the third question. How does he sit? By detailing the necessary withdrawal of the senses in 2.58.
The famous analogy.
Translation 2.58. When like a tortoise, which draws in its limbs from all directions, he withdraws his senses from sense objects, his wisdom becomes stable.
Kurmo ganiva sarvasha indriyarthavya. The tortoise withdrawing its 6 limbs into its shell is the illustration of the wise man withdrawing his 5 senses and his mind from their objects.
And the withdrawal has to be complete, with absolutely no lingering affinity for sense objects. The stability of his wisdom, his prajna, is achieved spontaneously, not by an act of will, but by the complete withdrawal of attention from the world.
But Kanja immediately warns that mere physical withdrawal isn't enough if the taste for the sense objects persists. Without realization of the supreme, the senses remain turbulent, which leads to the warning in 2.60.
Ah, a crucial caveat. Translation 2.6. O son of Kunti, forcibly carry away the mind of even a wise man who is practicing self-control.
This is a stark warning. Yataro hiapikuntea purusya vipachita. Even the mind of an experienced wise man of vipachita who practices self-control can be turbulent.
The senses, indriyat pramatini, are so turbulent that they can forcibly carry away the mind toward pleasures if it's not firmly established in God.
Right. The mind cannot be controlled by sheer force of will alone.
And this inherent turbulence proves the necessity of a specific countermeasure, which Kanta details in 2.61, translation 2.61. Having controlled all the senses, a striver should sit for meditation, devoting himself heart and soul to me. For his wisdom, mind is stable, constant, whose senses are under control.
The path to true control is unwavering devotion. Tani sarvaichi sayamya yukta asita matpar. The striver has to control all the senses, sit in meditation, and dedicate his heart and soul to me, to Kant, to God.
And this total devotion is the only force that's capable of overcoming those powerful, turbulent senses, ensuring that wisdom becomes stable.
It's the only way.
Now, here's where it gets really practical for every single listener. Kenti details the chain reaction that leads to self-destruction. This is a real aha moment for understanding human failure. Verses 2.62, 63.
A very famous and very important chain.
Translation 2.62 to 63. Brooding on the objects of senses, a man develops attachment for them. From attachment springs up desire. From desire, unfulfilled, ensues anger. From anger arises delusion. From delusion, confusion of memory. From confusion of memory, loss of reason. And from loss of reason, discrimination. He goes to complete ruin.
This is the catastrophic chain of ruin, and while it's detailed step by step, this can all happen in a split second. Number 1. Diaro vian pusas hogas teopajate. Brooding on sense objects leads to attachment, soga.
2. Sagatayata kama. Attachment leads to desire, kama.
And 3. Kamat krodobijate. Unfulfilled desire instantly leads to anger, koda.
Okay, let's just pause there. This is so relevant today. Brooding on something you want desire and then not getting it unfulfilled leads to instant anger. Just think about scrolling social media, brooding on a lifestyle or an item, failing to get it, and instantly feeling that rage or jealousy.
Absolutely. And that rage continues the descent. 4. Koda bhavati samoha. Anger leads to delusion samoha. You lose all perspective.
5. Samvat smriti vivrama. Delusion leads to confusion of memory. You forget the spiritual path. You forget your duties. You forget what you're even trying to achieve.
6. Smriti vraja buddhi naisho. Confusion of memory leads to loss of reason or discrimination. Buddhinasha. You lose the ability to judge right from wrong.
And 7. Buddhinasha prashati. Loss of discrimination leads to utter ruin, self-destruction. This chain shows that every sin, every fall from grace, starts with merely brooding on sense objects.
A powerful warning.
The antidote to this ruin is the attainment of tranquility, detailed in 2.6465, which addresses that final question. How does he walk or behave? Translation 2.6465. But the self-controlled yogi, practicant or striver, while enjoying the sense objects with the senses, which are controlled and free from attraction aversion, attains placidity of mind. With the attainment of such placidity of mind, all his sorrows come to an end, and the intellect of such a person of tranquil mind soon becomes firmly established in God.
The key here is that the sayama, the self-controlled person, does enjoy sense objects, but with senses that are ragadalvyukte free from attraction and aversion. He interacts with the world for sustenance, not for pleasure.
And this freedom leads to prasadam adigachapi, attaining placidity or serenity of mind, and that serenity destroys all sorrows, because sorrow is caused by that affinity for matter.
Exactly. Prasanasitozo hayi buddhi parivatitaita. The tranquil intellect soon becomes firmly established in God. This serene conduct is the ultimate measure of the realized soul. And conversely, as verse 2.6 notes, the undisciplined man who lacks this control loses his sense of duty, his peace, and his happiness.
And Casey uses one more powerful analogy in 2.67 to illustrate the danger of even one wandering sense.
A great one.
Translation 2.67. Just as the wind carries away a ship on the water, the mind that yields to any one of the wandering senses takes away the discrimination of man.
Vayunavam eva ambasi. The mind, the mana, is the rudderless ship, and the wandering senses are the strong, turbulent wind. If the mind follows even one wandering sense, indriyata hi karate, it's immediately led astray, ruining the discrimination, the praya, that leads to God realization.
So the control has to be comprehensive.
It must be.
Now we get the profound contrast in perception between the materialist and the sage in 2.69.
They're two different worlds.
Translation 2.69. That which is night to all beings, in that state of divine knowledge and supreme bliss, the self-controlled person keeps awake. And that, the ever-changing worldly happiness in which all beings keep awake, is night to the enlightened seer.
Yeah, Nisha Sarvabhutanam. What is dark night, ignorance of salvation, of God realization, for worldly people who are chasing transient pleasures.
Asya Jagrati Visayami. In that state of divine knowledge, the self-controlled seer remains wakeful. His intuition is filled with divinity.
And conversely, Yasya Jagrati Bhutani, what the worldly people are awake to, accumulating wealth, sensual pleasures, egoistic pursuits.
Sanisha Pashyatamune. That is night, or darkness and illusion for the enlightened seer. The sage sees all those mundane objects as transient and illusory, focusing only on the eternal.
And this internal saturation is captured so beautifully in the ocean analogy of 2.70.
Translation 2.70. As waters of different rivers enter the ocean, which, though full, remains undisturbed, likewise the man in whom all enjoyments merge themselves attains peace, not he who hankers after such enjoyments.
The ocean is Pudyamasham Akala Prasihar, ever full, and remains undisturbed, Akala Prasin, regardless of whether rivers flow into it like success or dry up like failure. The external flow of circumstance doesn't affect the internal state.
So, tadkamaya pravijanti sarvesa shanti mapnoti. The self-controlled seer is like the ocean. Worldly enjoyments merge into him without causing any agitation.
And peace is attained only by the one who is not a kamakami, one who hankers after desires, because limited, transient pleasures can never satisfy the sentient, limitless soul. And Kanna provides the final, detailed description of the Sitapraja's conduct, the Kim Vrahita, in 2.71.
The ultimate conduct.
Translation 2.71. He who gives up all desires and moves free from the sense of mind egoism and thirst for necessities of life attains peace.
The ultimate conduct requires 4 renunciations. He has to give up all desires, bihaya kaman sarvan. He has to move nispahath, free from thirst, which is a very subtle form of desire, even for the basic necessities of life.
He must be near mamo, free from the sense of mind, realizing that his body, his senses, the world, they are not his property.
And nirakara, free from egoism, free from the conviction that I am this body or I am the doer. The sources note that egoism is the subtlest and most important obstacle. If egoism is destroyed, the other 3, desire, thirst, and mindness, are easily abandoned.
And then, Sashantim Adhikachati, he attains spontaneous peace.
It's his natural axiomatic state that's realized upon this total renunciation.
And then the chapter concludes with 2.72, declaring the ultimate blissful result of achieving this state of realization. The final promise.
Translation 2.72. O Partha, such is the state of the God-realized soul. Having attained this state, he overcomes delusion. Being established in this state, even at the death hour, he attains Brahmic bliss, identification with the absolute state.
A Brahmi Stitya Partha. This is the Brahmi state, the state of godhood, of God realization. Individuality is wiped out by the complete renunciation of affinity with matter, leading to the absolute self.
Nainan, prapya vimuyati. Once attained, one is never deluded again, and the immense assurance is given in that final line, Shitavyantактолапи brahmanirvakam jati.
Even if you attain this state-breaking affinity with matter and renouncing egoism at the very hour of death, you attain brahmanirvakam. Identification with the absolute state. It is the final promise of liberation.
What an incredible journey through the philosophical heart of the Gita. Kata successfully moved Arjuna from absolute emotional and moral collapse,
Driven by ignorance and attachment to the unreal,
to the definitive realization of the distinction between the eternal soul and the perishable body in Sankhya Yoga.
And then he seamlessly transitioned to the practical application of this wisdom, Karma Yoga. He established the necessity of righteous duty and detailed the path where equanimity, remaining even-minded in success and failure, is defined as the essence of true yoga, the path to liberation.
So the core philosophical breakthrough here is that delusion, grief, and fear are born solely of attachment and egoism, which mistakenly identify the immortal self with the transient world.
And freedom, peace, and that blissful supreme state are realized only when you discriminate between the real and the unreal. This allows you to perform your necessary duty without affinity for the world or attachment to the results.
It's the shift from result-driven living to duty-centered living.
Exactly.
And as we heard in verse 240, Kun emphasizes the incredible safety of this path. Even a little practice of disinterested action protects us from the great fear of the cycle of birth and death. So if equanimity in success and failure is truly defined as skill in action, think about this.
What daily tasks, a job interview, preparing for a major presentation, or completing a crucial technical project, do you usually perform solely for the outcome, for the praise, or the paycheck?
What might happen if you were to focus only on the flawless execution and performance of that action, dedicated purely to the duty itself, and remain entirely unconcerned with the results or the reputation that follows?
That dedicated indifference to the outcome is what transforms the action from a source of bondage into a path to spiritual freedom.
And that is the applied wisdom of the second chapter.
Food for thought indeed. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the dawn of wisdom.
Until next deep dive, stay curious and stay informed.